what do I find the biggest mistake that people make as they're approaching retirement is
My next guest on Going Passive is RJ Kelly. RJ is founder and chief visionary officer of Wealth Legacy Group Incorporated in San Diego, California, a company specializing in the diverse needs of closely held businesses and professional families. And the goal of this discussion is to bring some educational content, as you know, to help and to serve property owners and people that are making these big decisions, which is why I wanted to have you on, RJ, because you've worked with my clients. We've worked together in the past, and we know that there's a need for this type of information out there so people can set up their families. So the feeling's mutual, and I hope we have a wonderful discussion today. The topic, of course, is going to be around going passive, primarily around my clients or folks who own rental properties who've been very active in the managing process, but maybe they're getting up in those retirement years where they're thinking they want to move on to something more passive. And what I love about our conversations is that they always revolve around helping those owners, serving those owners to go from being very active in managing their rental portfolios to enjoying their senior years, Lord willing, and have some time to do some travel, to take some time off. So, around that, I wanted to come out with this question right out of the gate. What are some of the biggest mistakes that you see that property owners, rental property owners, real estate owners make when they're planning their exit?
Well, that's such a great question, and that's really a wonderful place to start, is asking themselves, how I've got a book coming out on retirement planning that my COO and I labored over for the 3.5 years, and so it gave us a lot of time to explore what various people have said and how they've approached retirement and the things they did well and the things they didn't do so well. And so part of it really, what I call the 5 how questions of how much, how soon. Those 2 questions are you'd think, well, those are pretty elemental questions. But Doug, I got to tell you that I have yet to meet anybody that can even answer the first 2 questions. So as they're preparing for retirement, I would counsel them to ask themselves the 5 how questions. How much? Exactly. How much are they going to need? We had some very dear clients that, and actually, thanks to you, you made the introduction. They had a $3.8 million apartment complex. They were reaching the point where they were tired of the 4 T's, the tenants, trash, taxes, and termites. And they wanted out of those 2 a.m. calls that, oh, hey, the toilet's plugged again. And so they wanted to get to an exit. Well, that was a perfect example of someone who had thought through the 5 how questions of how much, how soon, how long do they need that income for? And the answer is a lot longer than most people think. The statistics are that if you took 1,000 73-year-olds, and why 73? Because that's the age when we're required to begin taking withdrawals from our retirement accounts. But if you took 1,000 73-year-olds, put them in a cohort as we call it, and looked at them again and asked yourself, and looked at the research to say, when would half of them be dead today? Under the latest research, when would half of them be dead, but half of them still alive? And you know what the answer is? It's shocking. It's 99.5 is the median age. That's the point where half of that cohort of 1,000 are dead, but half of the cohort are still alive. So that's age 100 for all intents and purposes. So how much, how soon, how long? They better be planning on continuing to have some real estate and some equities in their portfolio for the rest of their lives. And so, yes, it's great to exit out, but the goal would be to continue to own real estate, but in a fashion where they don't have to deal with the tenants, trash, taxes, and termites. And there are ways that we'll talk more as we go along about how they can continue to keep real estate in their portfolio, but not have the responsibilities of the upkeep of it. But so how much, how soon, how long, how many? One of the great things about real estate, it gives us income on a tax-favored basis. So once we sell, is there another way to be able to continue to have tax favor for our income streams? The answer is yes. there's more than just real estate, but real estate, I think, is truly one of the best, if not the best, for giving a sheltered income. So how much, how soon, how long, how many? In other words, have a bucket, at least one bucket or more, that's giving us income that's tax favored. But the biggest one, and you were waiting for me to get to this one, the biggest how question that most people have not answered is how come? How come? How come? Why do they want to get off the stage? And okay, getting rid of the 4 T's, that's a really good reason, but there better be something more than that instead. There's a wonderful presentation on TEDx, which is on YouTube as well. But Dr. Riley, R-I-L-E-Y, Riley Moynes, M-O-Y-N-E-S, and he talks about the 4 stages of retirement. And I encourage everybody to watch this. We've included snippets in our book as well, giving credit to Dr. Moynes. But the first phase is what he calls vacation phase. That's where people get to the sidelines, punch out, and they go, whoopee! You know, I could sleep, I could stay up as late as I want, I could sleep in as long as I want, no one's counting on me for anything. And that lasts about 6 to 18 months, you know, that phase of being on vacation. And then the second phase is, for many people, is depression. In some cases, depression, severe depression, in some cases even suicide. There needs to be something so that when they prepare, so one of the biggest mistakes that people make is they're considering retirement. Again, they haven't considered the answers to the 4 how questions, which is the 5th how question now. So that's a big mistake. But they haven't been thinking ahead to say, what am I going to do with my life? How am I going to make a difference in the world around me? I truly believe, and I know you do too, Doug, that we're here on the planet for a reason. Now, you and I are both people of faith, so we believe that God has a plan for us while we're working, and you know, again, through all phases of our life, He's got a plan for our life. But what is it? Why are we here on the planet? My unique experience and belief for why I'm here is going to be different than yours. But point is, if we retire from something without retiring to something, the research shows very clearly that's the quickest way to die. It may not be right away. When Adam and Eve took a bite out of the apple in the garden, and death didn't come right away. Death came afterwards. But the point is that we need to have something that we've already been thinking about. How can we be involved back in our communities? How can we be involved more in our families? How can we be more involved in maybe our faith, the church, synagogue, whatever that looks like, maybe in our school? How can we mentor other young men and women that are coming up that need to hear from someone like your listeners, like you, like me, to help them? We can build bridges over which we will never travel, but help them build that bridge. So the 5th how is the how come. How come? Why do you want to retire? What are the reasons? And lay that down on paper. Put that down so they can clear, and then keep adding to it as they think about it. Watch Dr. Moynes' presentation on the four stages of retirement. 3rd stage, by the way, after the depression phase. Hopefully that's short-lived. And maybe you won't even experience it if you've done a good job of the 3rd phase, which is begin exploring. What are ways in which that excite you when you put that on paper? The first list, what I call the four lists for really a living that is beyond imagination and with joy, is what do you love doing? Ask yourself, what do I really love doing? Or what do I want to do more of? Maybe I'm doing it already, but what do I want to do more of? And just start writing those things down. If you have a significant other in your life, ask them. Pray about it. Just say, hey, what do I love doing? Want to do more of? Okay. So on your 4 life on purpose lists, that's your first list. Second list would be, guess what? If the first list is what you love doing, what would be the second list? Right, what you hate doing. Now, doesn't mean you can get out of doing
Makes
it.
sense.
I mean, you got to do your laundry or whatever else. You got to do it. You know, the best thing we can do for the poor is not be one of them. You know, so you got to keep making sure you got income coming in and so forth. But the second list is, what do you hate doing? And maybe you've got to keep doing some of it, but you don't have to do it as much. So what could you do less of the things that you don't like doing? Or guess what? There are people out there that will love doing some of the things that you hate doing. So first list, what do you love to do, want to do more of? Second list, what do you hate doing and really would like to do less of if you can? Which the answer is, of course you can. But you first got to identify it. What's stealing your joy? Bucket that's got the holes in it. What do we need to do? How can we fill that out? Well, okay. So that's the second list. Third list, by the way, is what I call the looking back list. That's the challenge, Doug, for you, for me, for your listeners. I can just bet that they are highly, highly, highly successful people. So the challenge with the looking back list affects the looking ahead list. The looking back list is when you look back over your life and you ask yourself, where did I feel the greatest amount of joy? Where did I just feel like the ball was so big I was going to be hitting a home run no matter what, even I hit with one hand, it's going to be a home run. What are those places? And for me, a lot of times it was travel. It was being at 18,000 feet in Nepal. It was going around the tip of South America on an old freighter. Going into the heart of Turkey and going to exploring some of the seminaries that the Apostle Paul had set up in the inner parts of Turkey, and going into some of the underground cities that they had built underground to get away from the Muslim hordes at that time that were coming through and massacring people. Just going to different places, seeing different things. Zimbabwe and Botswana, microlighting over Victoria Falls, going into the Okavango Delta, and just seeing just amazing wildlife. So a number of these things were experiences like that. Another time was when I sang for an audience of 7,500, just me and my guitar on the stage. And incredible experience, speaking in front of an audience of 13,000 people, which was pretty terrifying, but it was also really exhilarating. So write down, what are the things when you look back over your life that stand out, that are memories that you loved, and what was it about that experience that was so exciting, so exhilarating? Because that list will prime you for the fourth list. And the fourth list is what I call the looking ahead list. Some people call it a bucket list. And here's the challenge. Here's what I found in working with highly, highly successful individuals over their lifetime, as well as myself at various stages. When they're feeling stuck, it's usually because they've accomplished so much in their lifetime that what's left to do? I mean, you can only go on a cruise to Alaska so many times, or a cruise up the Rhine, or I just went skydiving I've been skydiving a couple times. I went hang gliding. There it was. I just went hang gliding a couple weeks ago because it was on my bucket list and never done it, so I got to check that one off. But what are the things that still get you out of bed in the morning? And again, for super successful people, the challenge is, how do you keep filling up that list of things you got to do in this lifetime before you go before your maker? And the challenge is that list gets oftentimes shorter and shorter and shorter as we accomplish more things, we check more things off. But here's where people get stuck. So Doug, it's not, yes, they didn't plan for retirement, but yes, they didn't plan on the things in their life that still would get them excited. And maybe it's taking their grandkids, if they have them, on a special trip, on a challenge, or maybe it's starting a date night with their granddaughter, and they go blow up stuff with their grandsons, But making specific intentional acts and deciding how you're going to impact not only your world, starting with your family, but how you're going to impact your world in a lasting, positive way. And so that's what that fourth list is so hard for people to do, but it's so important, because as you start adding more things to that list, you feel the juices starting to come back again. So I found that to be a very successful exercise to go through the Life on Purpose list. And if one of your listeners wants a copy of that list, great, I'm happy to get it to them. They can just send me an email or reach out to us at wealthlegacygroup.com or give us a call. Check us out on our website, but I'm not sure if we have the Life on Purpose list there on our website, but I will make a note of that to ask one of the members of my tribe to make sure we do. So look for it there. But that's, is getting back to your great opening question, is what do I find the biggest mistake that people make as they're approaching retirement is they haven't given it much thought. They've spent more time planning their vacation.
If you're like many of my clients who've owned rental properties and apartment buildings for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, you're most likely tired. Maybe you're tired of the tenants. Maybe you're tired of the telephone calls, the toilets, the turnover, the terrible teas. We've heard it many times before. And what you're looking for is maybe a little more time off, a little more travel, a little more tranquility. That's why we've created the new webinar, Mastering the Exit. Sell your rentals, defer your taxes, and reinvest into passive income streams. Spend 60 minutes with us as we cover going into a 1031 exchange and looking into more passive options. Bill Exeter from Exeter 1031 Exchange Services will do an incredible job of unraveling the mystery of the 1031 exchange. And then we'll talk about what your reinvestment options could look like. Maybe you're going into more apartment buildings in another market. Maybe you're looking to reinvest into a net lease asset, or you're interested in a Delaware Statutory Trust or DST. Or maybe you have a favorite charity and you want to learn more about the Charitable Remainder Trust. Take the hour, register for this free webinar, and learn more about what your options are so you can get away from the terrible T's and focus more on the terrific T's. I'm Doug Tabor. We look forward to seeing you there.
Then they have planning how they're going to spend the next 20, 30, 35 years of their life or more. There's a sign reputedly, I haven't seen it, so this is apocryphal, but there's supposedly a sign up in New York City that says the first person to live to 150 has already been born. Think about that.
Wow.
I'm on a board for an organization here in town, Loyola Institute for Immunology. Their slogan is, imagine life without disease. Imagine life without disease. So as we prepare for retirement, again, getting those 5 how questions: how much, how soon, how long, which is a lot longer than most people are thinking, which is why they need to keep real estate and some equities in their portfolio, because those are the only things that have been shown to offset inflation and taxes. So how much, how soon, how long, how many have at least one bucket of income that will provide a non-taxable income stream or a tax favored. Again, that's where real estate comes in. Roth IRAs will do that, and also some of these hybrid life insurance contracts that, when they're properly designed, you buy them not for the death benefit, you buy them for the way to accumulate money and then take out the income stream without tax. So how many buckets? Make sure one of them is non-taxable, but the big overarching how is, how come? What's up? What are you going to do? And so the 4 phases, Dr. Moyne's vacation phase, depression phase, purpose phase, where they begin to look at what are the things that I would find meaning and purpose in my life if I were to do. And usually it's not something that's paid, it's psychic income, not tangible income that people are looking for at that point. And the 4th phase is what we call the life on purpose phase. That's where you're plugged in, you're making a lasting positive difference. Many times people will say that they're busier after they retire because they found so many things that just bring joy and purpose to their life that they didn't have time for. Okay, first question. It took, 15 minutes to give you an answer? What's left?
Well, it's important, and I don't even really need to ask my second question at this point, but you and I both know that the interviews we have with people who are seeking our services are usually after the point of when they let's just say that 73 mark. They usually work a lot later into their years. And my next question was going to be, at what point should an owner or someone begin to think about an exit strategy? Should it be 5 years, 1 year, right before? But it sounds like this is more life planning. I mean, someone really in their 50s should really start thinking about how they're going to spend their next 30, possibly 100 years, according to the the new science that's out there. And with AI, who knows? It may be smart enough to get rid of a lot of this disease. At the end of the day, I like to say, I shouldn't say, it's a little morbid, but none of us are getting out of here alive. We're all on the same
Still
trajectory.
One death per person, as far as I know.
Right. Unless we're raptured. So with all of that being said, that's kind of the 30,000 foot. Certainly, these are things that folks should be thinking about. They should be thinking about the future. They should be thinking about what they want to do. Of course, purpose. We know too many people who have retired and then went and sat on that first phase, that couch phase or that vacation phase a little too long, and they didn't make it much past that phase,
Nope.
which I've run into quite a bit. So let's start talking about actual vehicles that can take them into the retirement. Specifically, what I wanted to talk about today is the Charitable Remainder Trust, and then you have another type of vehicle asset. It's a Philanthropic Trust.
Yeah, I
maybe
call
we
it
can
PPT, a private philanthropic trust. It's akin, and it was created in the same tax act, the 1969 Tax Act, that created a lot of different tools that provide what we call split interest. By split interest, they mean it's okay for someone to do good things for themselves from a tax standpoint, from an income standpoint. It's okay to do good things for themselves as long as they do good things for their community at large, for their world at large. Most wealthy, affluent Americans understand that there is a reason and we have a purpose to support the social well-being of our country. I mean, for all its faults, and I've been around the world a whole bunch, and I know you have too, Doug, but for all its faults, it's still the best country I want to live in. And so the government in these rules, especially the 1969 Tax Act, made the provision for us that it's okay to do good things for yourself as long as you do good things for other people. And what I find most wealthy, affluent Americans don't understand, either because their advisors don't understand, or if they do, they don't bring them up because oftentimes the advisors themselves don't do these tools. And so it's a little bit awkward. Well, oh, is this what you're doing? Oh, no, I just read about it. Yeah. But as I say, what most wealthy, affluent Americans don't understand is the government gives us a choice in how we support the social well-being of the country. Now, if we don't choose, they'll choose for us. That's what capital gains taxes are. I mean, they're an optional tax. We don't have to pay them, and we won't go to jail if we don't, if we do something else instead, if we support the social well-being of the country in a way that's in alignment with our own value system. And that's legal. This is kind of shocking for many of the high net worth families I work with because most of them aren't aware of this. Yep, capital gains taxes are optional. You don't have to pay them. Federal death taxes, state inheritance taxes are optional. You don't have to pay them, and you won't go to jail if you support the social well-being of the country in a different way. And even a third to half of income taxes are not, are optional. Not all of them. You got to pay something, but a third to half of them, typically of income taxes, are optional. You can do other things instead. So that's the fun of what I do. This is not all that I do by any stretch of the imagination. Wealth Legacy Group, we do a whole bunch more things, but I love, one of my life goals is to facilitate $1 billion for philanthropy. And we crossed 100 million in August of 2012. We're well on our way for a second 100 million. But most of the time that comes from helping clients redirect that involuntary philanthropy, also known as taxes. Yep. So that involuntary philanthropy known as taxes, we can redirect that, make that optional, and redirect that towards the things, the causes that your listeners, that our clients, that are near and dear to their hearts. It floats their boat. It gets them so excited about what's being done with that mission. So, I mean, I'm just chatting the other day with someone, and if they sell the particular real estate at the amount that they're thinking about selling, they're going to create a $1.8 million tax bill. And of course, this is in California, so it's worse here. New York, New Jersey, California, Illinois, some of the other high tax states. But even in Texas, even in states that only have the federal capital gains tax, that's 20%. And then there's the 3.8% Medicare surtax, so I call it another 4%. Most people don't even count that. They don't even think about it. But on these transactions, they're going to have almost 4% Medicare surtax. And then states like California, it's 13.3 once you get over $1 million if you're single, or $1.1 million if you're married. So of gains. So it's 37.1% all in, and just in California. So we can make that optional by doing some planning using some of the tools that come out of the 69 Act, which the Charitable Remainder Trust is an example of a split interest gift. we're getting an income stream, and I say we, it could be the grantor, the husband, the wife, whoever has the property that's putting it in, the grantor, they can have an income stream for a certain number of years, or it can be for a lifetime, and it can be a lifetime for both beneficiaries. It gets a little more complicated if we try to go 2 generations, but that other idea that I talk about, the PPT, the Personal Philanthropic Trust, the longest I've seen there to go is 4 generations, from a 93-year-old great-great-great-grandfather and a 6-month-old grandson. So there's going to be income coming out of that trust for over 100 years. Now, ultimately, whatever's left in the bucket, when everybody kicks the bucket, goes to the charities that they've identified that they want that money to go to. But that could even be their own family charity. We routinely help clients set up their own little mini foundations. And if they happen to be a follower of Jesus, we have a sponsor that will, in fact, set up a mini foundation, and it's 0 fees, 0 costs. Even for what we call complex gifts, where we put like real estate, stocks, things like that are considered a complex gift. But this particular organization has very wealthy sponsors behind them that want to increase the amount of philanthropy back in the world and in the community. So they just pick up all the fees. Last year was $7.5 million of individual fees, and another $5 million of fees that would have been charged for complex gifts is 0. But again, they have to be people of faith. In this case, it's followers of Jesus. But anyway, that's the Charitable Remainder Trust. I did my first one over 4 decades ago when I was in practice up in Spokane. He was a very modest fellow. You never guessed that he was worth millions and millions and millions of dollars. So we helped sell some of his capital assets, which included a business, included actually a mini zoo. When I asked him, Bob, what's this $250,000 here that just says other? And he laughed. He looked at me and goes, oh, those are my critters. So, time out. Can you define critter for me? It was camels and emus and it's just on and on, these exotic animals. And so we made that part of the sale. But in doing so, we did it with a wrapper around it that is a philanthropic wrapper. First thing is, though, when you put assets into this philanthropic wrapper, you need to make sure there's no debt on it. And there are ways that we can move debt. I've had situations where we've been able to bifurcate a piece of property and then move the part into a CRT that didn't have any debt, and we just kept the debt with the other larger piece. Or maybe we move the debt to another property. So maybe we take a building, take the debt off that, put the debt in place on another building, and then now we've got a free and clear property that we can put in. The reason for that is that when we put an asset into one of these philanthropic trusts, they're irrevocable. That means it ain't coming back. The string we had tied to that thing is cut. So because we no longer can get those assets back, in fact, the assets are now titled in the name of this charitable trust, that's relief of debt. And so therefore that creates what's called boot income. Some of your clients will know what that is. And that boot income is taxable as ordinary income. So we don't want that to happen. That's a bad day in paradise for that to happen. So there's ways we get around that, but bottom line, if they're going to use one of these philanthropic trusts, we need to put an asset in that doesn't have any debt on it. Also, if you've got an apartment building and you also do laundry and you have laundry machines on site and you're getting money, you got to break that off. You can't donate that into the charitable trust because that's an income-producing asset that of a different kind and creates what was called UBIT, unrelated business taxable income. And again, I'm not a tax attorney. I do have a master's in financial services with a subspecialization in taxation. You don't come to see me to do your tax returns or give you tax advice, but tax is my living, working, breathing area, and in terms of the total comprehensive planning that we do. But with this, again, with this charitable trust, I can give you another example of a great advantage of the trust, in addition to the fact you're getting an income stream for the rest of your lifetimes, maybe 2 generations. Whatever the tax nature of the income is, it will retain that. So if it's capital gain income that's being distributed, well, they'll pay capital gains tax on the income that's distributed. If it's ordinary income, pay tax as ordinary income. And that's another complicated issue that we can talk about in terms of the tiers of income, TIERS, not TEARS, tiers of income. But that asset goes in there, now it's off the radar screen. Creditors can't get at the money. I knew of a situation, it was not one of my clients. I was brought in to see if I could salvage the wreckage, but no, it was too far gone. The guy had sold his business back in the early 90s, had net $10 million, so he bought $9 million of highly leveraged real estate and put $1 million into a charitable remainder trust, or what we like to call a capital gains elimination trust. And unfortunately, you remember back in the early 90s, things went sideways. And so he lost all $9 million of that leveraged real estate. And the creditors were trying to go after the money that was in the CRT. Couldn't get at it. It's protected against creditors. Because ultimately there's a charity at some point when everybody kicks a bucket that are income beneficiaries, whatever's left goes to a charity or charities. Again, as I say, it could be even the family giving fund. So it has asset protection, which many other tools do not. It gives not only an income stream, but it gives at minimum a 10% tax deduction against ordinary income, deductible up to, in this case, usually 20% or 30%. There's different rules for different kind of situations, but you still get a tax deduction of a minimum of 10%. So if you put in a $10 million shopping center, you're going to get at least $1 million of deductions, and you get 6 years to use that up. So whatever you don't use up in the first year, you get to carry it forward for 5 more years. Okay, I'll take a breath, and hopefully that's giving you a little bit of something to work with there.
Sure,
but
sure, absolutely.
One more key point. This is not something you do the day before you sell the property. And particularly in states like California and a few other states, in this case, California Franchise Tax Board, they are very aggressive. No offense to anybody listening out there who is with the Franchise Tax Board. Thank you. Yeah, okay. Don't show up at my door. But they are very aggressive about situations where somebody sets up a charitable trust weeks, maybe even just a month before the transaction goes hard, and worst possible outcomes. If they find it, the worst possible outcome occur. And by the way, they're really good at finding it. Because now you've got this irrevocable transaction, you've moved the property or whatever into this charitable trust that's irrevocable. You cannot get it back. And if you do it too close, if you set it up too close before the sale date, they're going to come in and tax you on the transaction anyway, and yet all your money's tied up inside the trust. So, not a good thing. How long should you have? I think it makes, again, I'm not the attorney, but the situations that I've seen talking with various attorneys across the country, normally you want to have at least 3 months, maybe even longer. So we set up the trust, we put the asset into the trust, we start the listing service where you're going out to, Doug, you're out there representing the property, but it's in the name of that philanthropic trust. It's not in the name of the individuals. So there needs to be some clear intent that there's philanthropy. And it also helps if the donors are themselves also philanthropic. I mean, if they've never given a dime in their lifetime, and it ever comes down to a challenge with the Franchise Tax Board or IRS, and they're not philanthropic, they're going to be challenged. Doesn't mean that they're not going to be able to get the tax benefits. It's just it's not as clean cut as if you've got somebody who, they're not giving away millions of dollars, but they're giving away something consistently to a couple of charities that are meaningful to them. So they do look at that, and sometimes it really does make a difference.
So don't sign a listing agreement prior to putting it in the trust is what I hear. Secondly, back to our opening statement, it needs to be planned out. It's not something that can be super spontaneous. You need to get ahead of it. So what's the difference then between a CRT and a private Philanthropic
PPT.
Trust.
And by the way, that's our own word for it, our own name for it. So don't try to look it up because you're not going to find it by at least. But you may find what I'm
Is there a
describing.
difference?
There is a difference. And the difference is it was created in, again, that same 1969 Tax Act. Because Americans have, as a culture, we've always been wildly philanthropic. And so that fomented into the end of the 60s where Congress just said, look, we want to give you more ways that you can be philanthropic. And that's where they created these split interest gifts that do good things for the family and good things for charities or charity. And when we are working with the attorneys and they're drafting documents, one of the things we do, by the way, is make sure that there's flexibility in being able to change the charities. So if you have been giving a long time to a particular charity, I won't name one because I don't want to offend anybody, but they've been giving to somebody and then over time they just decide that that's not as important to them anymore. They can substitute out. They can put in, it just has to be a registered 501c3 charity. So that's tax code for philanthropic organizations. So in doing so, they have some flexibility. So we get the irrevocable tax benefits with revocable beneficiaries, but they just still have to be charitable beneficiaries. That's the key. But with the preferred or the private philanthropic trust, the difference there is, even though it was originally created back in the late 60s, that was called a pooled income fund. That was the name of that particular type of philanthropic strategy. And think back in 1969, were there a whole bunch of mutual funds out there? Not really.
There were not.
Were there buckets, were there pools of income and assets that people could create to do charitable purposes? Heck no. There's still about 1,300 pooled income funds. Mostly they're with regional, what are called community foundations. They're not affiliated with any church or school or religious cause or whatever. They provide, so here in San Diego, we have our San Diego Community Foundation. We have the Jewish Community Foundation. Both of them are fantastic organizations. I believe that there's a Catholic foundation here as well for those that are the Catholic denomination and want to really specifically support Catholic causes around the world. So those are the types of examples where they have as a pool where thousands of people can participate in this pool and they make a little bit of money. I mean, they may make a couple of % on their returns, but when they're gone, or after a certain period of time, that money then gets to be used to go towards certain kinds of charitable causes. So the pooled income funds were created in the '69 Tax Act. But what's happened is there's so many better choices out there. And most of these nonprofits are desperately wanting to get rid of their pooled income funds, but they can't because, again, they got to wait till everybody's dead. So it's just, yeah. Well, so a group of very clever tax attorneys, I think they were in Chicago, wrote to IRS and said, gee, we want to see if we could create some new pooled income funds, but we want them to be private. They want to be individual. So it's kind of oxymoronic. They're not a pool. No, they're just by themselves. Typically, it's one family. And they have a sponsor. So there are a few charities out there that act as the sponsor for this. They create their own individual bucket. And what the attorneys asked for is that we want to use the last 3 years of well, I'm trying to not let this get super complicated, but what's called the AFR, the applicable federal midterm rates. So IRS publishes every month a list of new interest rate figures that we have to work with, depending on whether it's short, intermediate, or long type of transactions. So in most of these cases, we're using long-term, but maybe midterm rates. And so IRS said, I don't know if it was a woman, she was obviously not stroking her beard, but the guys back there were going, would we allow this? Okay, sure, we'll allow this. So by creating now what sometimes are called baby PIFs or immature PIFs, or the basic is we're using the interest rates that IRS has given us over the last 3 years. And for quite a while, those interest rates were quite low. Obviously now they've increased substantially. But at some point, they're probably going to go back down again, probably not this year, or maybe not even next year, but at some point, they're going to go back lower, and that will be more favorable for this kind of instrument to be used. But I'll give you an example. I had a client that came to me 4 years ago, and they had sold their business and their real estate, and they didn't want to do a tax-deferred exchange, a 1031 exchange. They inadvertently created a $2.1 million tax bill for themselves between capital gains on the sale of the business and the sale of the real estate. And so they had hired us to manage the $7.5 million that was coming from the sale. But first I found out that they were very philanthropic. And they were leaving money to the Goodwill Salvation Army and to an animal rescue organization. And all great organizations. And there's so many good ones out there, but that happened to be their choice. And so, two things. Number one, we took $2 million of the $7.5 million, put it into one of these PPTs, and again, interest rates were different then, so the tax result today would be less than it was back then. He was 79, she was 83. We were able to create, with that $2 million transfer into that irrevocable trust, we were able to create an 81% tax deduction for them. So it came out to like $1,634,000 of tax deduction we created using this philanthropic trust. They're getting the income stream from it. Unfortunately, we lost him a few years ago, very sadly, but the wonderful 90-year-old now, beautiful woman, sparky as can be, and she's continuing an income stream for the rest of her life. They decided not to have any income continue for generations to get them the maximum tax deduction, and they just felt like taking care of their other generations, so they didn't need to give them more money. But in this case, not only did we get a deduction for this, this $1,634,000 from the PPT, but I found out reading their estate planning documents, they were also giving their home to these same three organizations upon their death. Great, but it does no tax benefits for them while they're alive. So I asked them how they felt. Did they still feel good about giving to those three organizations after they were gone? And they said, absolutely. I said, you're sure you're not going to change your mind? You're not going to give it to one of the kids or give it to both the kids? Nope. We're absolutely sure. So by then moving it from a gift at death to making it a gift during their lifetime that they get to live in the house for the rest of their lives, what's called a life estate agreement, they got another $1,330,000 income tax deduction. Income tax, not estate tax, income tax, because they gave it during their lifetime and retain what's called a life estate. They get to live there for the rest of their lives. And whatever's left in the bucket then goes on. The house gets to those three organizations, it gets sold, and they each get a third of it. So that's another technique. We basically wiped out their tax, long and short of it. Yeah. We eliminated the tax from their sale transaction by just doing a couple of what to me seemed to be very straightforward ideas that no one had thought about in their crew. So
now you bring up you bring up one of the major concerns that folks typically bring up, and maybe you can address it briefly. What about the kids? That's the thing with the Charitable Remainder Trust. I'm assuming with the PPT, there's some options there, but
Great
how
question.
do your children become part of the process as well, or become part of the beneficiary as well?
Yeah. You've got to be careful. This is, again, I'm not the estate planning attorney. I'm just a guy I've seen this dissension happen too often. There's a saying that you never really know your family until you share an inheritance with them. And if it's parents, unfortunately, they don't get to see it, although oftentimes the wife has to see it, the mother has to see it and watch her kids just go to war with each other. And sometimes with them, so it really makes sense to sit down with professionals, create a plan. At some point, this, for those of you who are listening and watching, if you're the progenitor, if you're the one that's made the money, this is the money you've made. By God's grace, for those people of faith, we're called to be stewards of that money. But point is, this is not, your kids did not make your money for you, probably. You made your money. And so if you leave them anything, I think that's a good idea. But if you choose to not leave them anything, and there's some families that are so broken that getting money down to them, if it's not in a protected way, would be absolutely disastrous for them. And so we can create, I remember one woman, her attorney, who was a rather basic estate planning attorney, came to me and said, RJ, I've got somebody I worked with. She needs help way beyond what I can provide. And so would you meet with her and see if you could be of any help? And I did, and she was absolutely charming. Had worked in and I've got just a couple minutes left, by the way, before I have to start.
Right. I know we have a hard stop. So before you jump into that story, let's kind of wrap up. I really think the theme here has become all about the planning, which is what I was hoping the direction of this conversation went to.
Good.
On a closing question, if someone wants to learn more about these types of strategies, certainly we're going to put your link down below. We're going to connect them with you. What other professionals do you recommend folks connect with to get the actual advice that they need for these types of decisions?
Yeah, Doug, again, another great question, and we do things a little differently in our practice, and I've been blessed beyond imagination. I'm grateful for that, and I think it's partly about the way we operate. And so, if any of your listeners want to just simply have a conversation with no strings attached, we'll do 20 minutes, sometimes even 30 minutes, to talk about anything they want to talk about in terms of their planning, their structure, their situation. And so if they just want an impartial but really sophisticated approach and ideas, we'll do that without charge. We're a consulting firm, so we get paid by fees. We also are an independent registered investment advisory firm, so we also oftentimes make our compensation from not only our planning fees, but we will get advisory fees from assets. We also provide now, for the last 4 years, we've really gone into the alternative investment side of things, and that's an area that traditional investment advisors don't do anything in, or very, very limited. So we get compensated. We got lots of ways we can get paid. So I'm not worried about sitting down for somebody 20 to 30 minutes, especially if we can talk about some philanthropic outcomes. And my dad died when I was 18, and I watched a multi-million dollar company come off the rails. 10 years after his death, the company was bankrupt. And so we lost, because we had some comprehensive planning done, even in my little town of Yakima, Washington. We had some great asset protection done for my folks. We didn't lose the family ranch. We didn't lose certain things, but we lost all of the business assets. So the challenge is I don't find very many professionals. I'm in a study group, a national study group, that we intentionally discuss and review and learn and understand how to use these various philanthropic tools and strategies. Unfortunately, most professional advisors out there, attorneys, CPAs, bankers, financial advisors, do not have that expertise. So I'm not even sure where to direct you. My go-to is I use ChatGPT. We call her Sophia. I like having things personal. So we just go to Sophia and say, Sophia, I want to learn more about charitable remainder trusts. Where are some good sources? What could I go to find? What videos are out there that I could listen to? What's on YouTube? Boom. You'll get a download. If somebody's not using artificial intelligence, they can still go to the various Chrome and certain things that are very smart, and just type in charitable remainder trusts, videos, YouTube, go onto YouTube and directly look for things there. There's a plethora of different things I think they can find if they do it that way.
That's excellent advice. And RJ, we really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Again, your link and contact information will be down below. And we look forward to connecting with you in the future to talk more about these
Honored to be with you,
investment
Doug. Anytime
decisions.
you ask, I will answer. I have such respect for you. So I hope this is helpful to you and your clients.
Thank you, RJ.
You got it.